Welcome to Fertility Friendly Food. I'm your host, Stephanie Waaldyk, accredited practicing dietitian and nutritionist and director of The Dietologist, an Australian-based practice focused on optimizing fertility through nutrition. This podcast will bring you snack-size episodes for you to learn, grow, and be inspired by the latest research, facts, and practical lifestyle tips about eating well for optimal fertility, helping you cut through the confusion and myths to take back some of the control on your fertility journey, one bite at a time. Welcome back to another episode of Fertility Friendly Food, the podcast. My name is Stephanie Waaldyk and I'm an expert fertility dietitian and nutritionist and founder of The Dietologist and of course your host of the podcast. Before we jump into today's episode, don't forget to download your free preconception lifestyle checklist. There's a link in the show notes, emailed right to your inbox, and it talks you through some key nutrition and lifestyle strategies that you can do to support optimal preconception health. I'm really excited to get into today's episode. I'm interviewing Amanda Waaldyk from Angea Acupuncture and Yoga to ask her all your burning questions about acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine and fertility treatments. It is an awesome chat and I can't wait for you to tune in. Hey, Amanda, welcome to the Fertility Friendly Food podcast.
Thanks for having me, Steph.
So we have teed this up and we are so excited to talk to you. And I've interviewed you before for one of my programs, Get Pregnant with Endo. And so I know who you are and what you do. But for our listeners, can you give a bit of an intro to who is Amanda and Angea Acupuncture and Yoga?
Absolutely. So I am director of Angea Acupuncture and Yoga, which is a women's health clinic in Paran. And we essentially specialize in women's health, fertility, pregnancy, also to being an adenomyosis sufferer and endo warrior myself, is that we have a big focus as well on endometriosis. And so that's also incorporated with, we do events as well, and also having a background in yoga. It's really kind of, our focus in clinic is really mainly about East meets West. So understanding the Western medicine and then being able to incorporate that into a Chinese medicine modality and being able to, really kind of bridge the gap between those two, because it's all well and good. You know, someone can go and see a Chinese medicine practitioner and you can say, oh, you've got liver qi stagnation. And people will think, oh my goodness, what's actually wrong with my liver? And so it's been able to actually then communicate that in a way that someone can actually understand.
Yeah, amazing. I think that East meets West ideology is something that I always resonate with, and bridging that gap is so important because there's so much value in both approaches, and certainly Eastern medicine is, been around a long time and has done amazing things for many people. So yeah, I'm really excited to get into this interview. So where did your interest in acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine in the fertility space come from? Did it kind of stem from your own experiences with endometriosis and adenomyosis, or is it something you were seeing a lot yourself when you were working with patients?
So I initially came from a sporting background. So I used to volunteer with the Western Bulldogs when I finished uni. And then I went over to China and studied in China for a year, and then came back and set up my clinic, and I had a sole focus on doing sports medicine. And then interestingly, when I'd set it up in 2007, I just kept having women appear at my door. And so for me, that was a moment just to kind of take stock and reflect, okay, I think there's something in this. And so then I changed my whole focus. Just naturally, it was just an organic move to then go and support women in that fertility space. And I guess in terms of having sort of my own journey as well with conception and coming from, I guess, a life experience where I've had my own personal health journey as well, and then a background. I did 2 years of nursing, when I was at uni, there's always been an interest in wanting to be able to help and support people. And I think that sometimes too, our fertility journey can be so challenging, and there's something really important about being able to hold space for people, but then in that being able to find also too the right direction in which they need to head. So do they need to see a fertility specialist? And so I guess in our clinic, that's what we're really great at, is having that integrative approach of them working alongside fertility doctors, obstetricians, and really having that whole sort of village, pointing nutritionists and kinesiologists, because it takes a village, as we know, right?
Yeah. Not just to raise a child, but to conceive a child for so many people. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It takes a village. I did not know you had that sporting background. That's fascinating. I learned something new about you today. Amazing. So before we hit record on this podcast, I was just telling you that pretty much almost all of our fertility clients, and often in my DMs, I get lots of questions about, do you think maybe it might be worth trying acupuncture whilst I'm working on some of these other things? And I'm always like, yeah, go ahead. It's worth a try. But I also don't know any of the science and literature and the support around acupuncture and fertility outcomes. And I know as well, like, timing is really important in IVF cycles around when you're getting acupuncture. So maybe can you walk our listeners through the more professional, finer details than what my brain knows, which is very little?
Absolutely. I guess first and foremost is that we're wanting to bring the body back into homeostasis. And in Chinese medicine, this is the philosophy or the ideology, as you were saying, around yin and yang. And so essentially when we're having acupuncture, we're putting the body into a state of parasympathetic. So we're taking it out of its stress state of flight, fight, and freeze into a parasympathetic. And when the needles are inserted, so they're inserted through the subcutaneous layer of the skin, which then can enter into the muscles. And each point has its own physiology. And it's also too, when that needle's going in, it's a communication. If you think about our body, we have a biological feedback system, the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis and the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And so when the needle enters in, it's communicating with those different layers of the skin, the muscles, and then being able to have a response within the body, because when it enters, it creates piezoelectricity. So sometimes people will say that they get that sort of like a little shock. That's the qi. We call it qi hitting the needle, which is then creating a feedback system into the body, which is then relayed through the endocrine system, the reproductive system, the cardiovascular, being able to create a positive response to bring that body back into its state of homeostasis, back into balance. And so there's been some great studies and literature recently to show that Chinese medicine and acupuncture both can increase your chances of a positive outcome for a pregnancy, to do acupuncture pre and post your IVF transfer. And it's also it's encouraged that essentially we're wanting to be able to create healthy embryos. And so as we know, it's a 90-day preconception program. Takes 100 days for an egg to mature, and within that time, that those different little eggs that are growing that don't always reach maturity, that go through that process, then die through our treature, go back into the egg bed, is that IVF is essentially triggering all those follicles that have gone back into that egg bed. And so acupuncture works also too by specific points in through the abdomen into the uterus by creating a healthy blood flow. And there's been studies as well that show on the Doppler you can actually see an increased amount of blood flow, and that's also reflected in our menstrual cycle as well, of when we have our bleed. So people will report that from having acupuncture, from going from painful periods to pain-free periods, less clots, because essentially it's energy. Energy is moving, and that's what qi is. And we're targeting the qi, which then is creating that positive response in the body.
That's fascinating about the piezoelectric effect. I remember learning about that at uni in other contexts around bone health and things like that. But no, that makes complete sense. And yeah, certainly I think a lot of people just think about the blood flow component, and I know that there's certainly a lot more to it. So I appreciate you adding color to that picture for us.
And it is it's amazing. Like, you can feel the benefits when you hop off the table. You feel a deeper state of calm. And it's also too, we're switching off that cortisol hormone, and we're bringing the body back into that regulatory system, because we all just lead such busy lives these days. So it's restoring the yin. And as women, we are yin. Males are yang. And for a lot of us, we're spending that time in that yang masculine energy. And when we're in that yin state too, we're in receptivity. So it's an invitation, right, for the body to come back to that state of being. And it's also an invitation for the embryo then. We're inviting life force in. And I think that's a big part that actually is missing. You know, when you're in that modality of IVF, it's very much you're on appointments, everything's structured, is that you feel like you're on a bit of a treadmill. And when we give back to ourselves and we have that self-care routine, and acupuncture is a great part of that self-care routine, is that we're creating receptivity, we're giving back to ourselves, we're honoring our body, we're honoring the mental, the physical, the emotional. And acupuncture essentially works on the spiritual side as well, but it also works on the physical side. So it's a beautiful combination.
I was about to say that too. It is a beautiful combination of both. And yeah, I think a lot of clients that I know that go and do acupuncture, however they're trying to conceive, definitely report, you know, lots of benefits of treatment. Now, turning the page and now looking more at traditional Chinese medicine, what is the role of traditional Chinese medicine in fertility management and fertility cases? And does it always go hand in hand, like acupuncture and TCM, or are they separate, or how does that work?
So traditional Chinese medicine is essentially an umbrella.
Okay.
And so within that umbrella, we have acupuncture, we have Chinese herbal medicine, we have tweener, cupping. And so it just depends on what the practitioner's actually been trained in. So some practitioners are trained solely in acupuncture. Myself, I was trained in traditional Chinese medicine, herbal medicine, and then I went on to study acupuncture post that. So I have both the double degree. And so I guess for fertility and IVF, it's very different, is that because there's not a lot of research in terms of side effects with specific herbs and then IVF drugs, is that mainly herbal medicine will be used between cycles,
right,
to help restore hormonal balance. It may be to work on, you know, endometriosis, fibroids. It just depends on what the specifics of those conditions are. Otherwise, it's great. A lot of what we do in clinic is we'll use it for natural conception. So specific types of herbs will help to regulate the follicular phase, also to helping to support ovulation, and then, of course, the luteal phase. And so there's specific herbs that support progesterone. There's other herbs that are anti-inflammatory. The specific herbs that help to move blood and stagnation. So there's a whole, our Materia Medica of Bensky is like 500 pages long with different formulas. And so anecdotally, this evidence has been collected over thousands of years, which is then being put into practice. And so essentially we're just putting a modernized spin on that now, but we're still taking that ancient wisdom. And when we have that ancient wisdom and we're using that in this modern context, it's really quite profound, the results that you see with your patients.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful, you know, East meets West, you know, connection just there as well, you know, because that was going to be my next question. We get what are things that are considered safe and unsafe, and what kind of data do we have and research. And so it's interesting that you say usually it's been used between the actual IVF cycles, because we're not sure what it's doing with drugs plus herbs, for example.
So if we're doing a stim cycle, that's exactly right. And we're using a gonadotropin, a gonal FSH, and we're using herbs such as dongui, which is estrogen based, is that with too much of that estrogen, that could therefore then cause an early ovulation. So it's for those that do use herbs with IVF cycles, you have to have a lot of experience to understand what that, how that whole hormonal process plays out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess in terms of like research, there's lots of research that comes out of China where we get the data, and it's also really hard, I guess, here in Australia because there's so many restrictions on specific medicines that we can't actually bring in. And it's also we only use Empirical Herbs, which is a company based up in Coffs Harbour or Port Macquarie, sorry, and all of those have been tested through a specific tiering method. And they're all organic herbs because previously in China it was such an unregulated system. And I think that's why a lot of people have fear around using Chinese herbal medicine too, is because a lot of the herbs were contaminated. But now we have this process of where the herbs are actually tested. So it takes out any pesticides, any heavy metals. So the herbs that are actually imported into Australia are safe for consumption.
Yeah, that is such a great point that you've made because a lot of people worry about that. I think there is a lot of fear around contamination and heavy metals, especially herbs from China. So it's great to hear that there are amazing organizations that are dedicated to making sure that everything is safe and free from those types of contaminants.
Absolutely. And I think it's also too, as practitioners, we have a duty of care for our patients. And so the products that are imported now into Australia, of course, are completely safe for consumption. It was quite an unregulated system back in the day. But of course, now the TGA have certain steps and processes in place to be allowed to be able to actually import products into Australia from China. So it's also too, like you can use granules, you can use raw herbs, you can use pill forms. So it comes in many different facets and it just depends on what your practitioner will specifically prescribe you.
Yeah, fascinating. And obviously a lot of people that listen to this podcast are women, but do males who are trying to conceive come and see you for Chinese medicine, acupuncture? Are there benefits around male fertility and TCM and acupuncture?
Yes, well, we know now, isn't it, that there's a decline of men's sperm, and it essentially takes two to tango. And I think there's so much, women take such a big part in that, but it's the males are sort of really left out of that picture. But I think now with the big change and decline in sperm quality, morphology, and motility, is that it is essentially that they need to really take care of themselves. Not only now, but it's also for their future fertility as well, even younger men, because we know that we live in such a toxic environment, and it's all that intake that everything in your body is essentially consuming that it affects our reproduction. And so, yes, male fertility has been covered in China for thousands of years. Essentially, a lot of it was around longevity. The practices were around longevity. And also too, that did include a bit of like tantra through breath work, because by every time a man would ejaculate, that would be losing chi, that would be losing jing and essence. And so sperm is essence. In Chinese medicine, when an egg and a sperm connect in that Big Bang theory, in that cosmos of life force, is that requires essence. And if we're losing, for us as women, we're cultivating our essence, but for males, they're losing their essence. And over time, that can therefore deplete their chi and make them tired. So it's like, after you've had sex, how a man will always just go, oh, I'm exhausted. It's because of that release of energy and chi. And so there's lots of Chinese medicine formulas and specific herbs that help for impotence, also to sustain an erection, because that requires a lot of yang energy. And also chi is very dynamic, and chi holds things in place. So it's like when you're pregnant, when you get to the end of the day, like your tummy's hanging out, that's because chi's tired. It doesn't actually have its ability to be able to to hold its structure, hold things in place. So that yang motion of an erection, it's like, so we have a hard erection. And so there's specific herbs that can help to support that, as well as the production of sperm. Sperm is made in the testes, and particularly like if there's things such as varioceles, because that indicates that there's blood stagnation in a vein, which is also which is visible. So there's herbs that will help to support motility, specifically for morphology as well as then working on like the whole body medicine, which can be for the DNA fragmentation, as well as male health just in general.
Fascinating.
Yes. I mean, it really, when you go into the science of it, it's essentially like pharmacology. So herbs are broken down into their botanics, and then also to like what's the pharmacological response of that? Is it to reduce inflammation? Is that like looking at the cytokines? Are we looking specifically at driving or removing blood stagnation? So, which is similar to like, that's what aspirin does. So there's a herb Danshen, spelt D-A-N, and then Shen, and that herb specifically used in high amounts, which they've done research for, is just as effective as Clexane.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so it's in China, you have both modalities, East and West, in the hospitals. And so if you're sick, you can go and actually get an IV of a specific Chinese herb.
Wow, that's so cool.
I know. I wish we actually had that here in Australia. Like for women with PID, pelvic inflammatory disorder, you would have a tampon infused with Chinese herbs, and then you'd sit that tampon would stay in for 12 hours, and then you'd remove the tampon and then put another one in, because as we know, our vagina is highly absorbable, right? Yeah. So there's so many things that we're limited to here in Australia, but it has very much a wider benefit for so many things that it can treat.
Yeah, it's great to hear about that. And I think touching on that, you know, obviously in China, there is this big fusion of both Western and Eastern medicine ideologies in the one setting. And very much here in Australia, it seems to be it's one setting or the other setting. It's very like separated out, right? There's obviously lots of similarities and lots of differences in the way that these two philosophies and approaches are. But what do you see are the places where it connects well and the places where there's a lot of discrepancy? That's a really big question, I know.
So I think from a Western medicine perspective is that, you know, a lot of doctors are fearful of it because they don't understand it. Whereas as a Chinese medicine practitioner that is well versed and studied, you know, Western and Eastern aspects of Western medicine is also too, we study pathophysiology in our course. It's that we actually can understand it from a Western medicine perspective. So I think in terms of, it's like the symbol of yin and yang, right? We see that. And in the space of yin and yang, it's called the taijutsu, and it's like the void. And so in that void, it's like there can be fear, or there can be like, this is where we get this beautiful fusion of East and West. So for things such as cancer, it's amazing to support someone if they're going through chemotherapy for the side effects. Of course, for fertility, there's lots of benefits, combining both acupuncture, Chinese medicine with also to Western medicine. A lot of like emotional support as well for mental health. I mean, gastrointestinal as well. There's so many blends of where we can infuse Chinese medicine with Western medicine. But I think a lot of it comes from fear. And then also practitioners not always being able to communicate correctly, right, of what their approach is and what they're trying to treat.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point on the communication component, because, you know, that is absolutely critical. If people don't understand why they're doing what you're asking them to do, the chances of them doing it for very long is slim to none, really. So you have to be a really good communicator, not just a great clinician. It's so important.
It really is, isn't it? I mean, that is essentially the foundations of what makes a great practitioner. Is your communication.
Yeah, totally agree. Now, I have a question for you, Amanda, because a lot of people are a bit fearful of needles, and IVF in particular is a time where there are lots of needles, and perhaps we need to overcome this fear a little bit of the pokey things. But naturally, acupuncture itself involves very fine needles. So what do you do if you have somebody who comes in to see you who really wants to explore acupuncture, but needles are not their favorite thing?
Okay, it's I applaud those people that do come in and they face their fear. It is a really big one to face. Yes, NLP therapy actually works quite amazingly to help them overcome that fear. So if we have a patient that comes into the clinic, we will basically talk them through, of course, what's going to be happening, also show them where we're going to do the acupuncture. And it may just be a gentle sort of easing way into it initially. So it might just be a few needles, and then it can be acupressure. We also use, which is what's called acupuncture seeds. So it's like a Band-Aid that has a really small needle on it that's like a millimeter. And so by using the acupuncture seeds, it's creating less of a really deep sensation that they could feel when the needle's inserted. And that also gives them time to be able to come into breathing exercises, because a lot of people can panic. It can trigger anxiety as well. So it's really important to guide them through where the needles are going, and sometimes to show them what the length of the needle, or to use those acupuncture seeds. And we also use laser as well now in clinic.
Oh, amazing. In terms of the needle, what fineness is it? Is it so fine that it doesn't even usually draw any kind of blood? Because I think that is a common question.
So yes, we are essentially poking holes into you, but we're not leaving holes in you.
We go in, but you cannot see us coming out.
You're not leaking blood. You're not leaking air. You're not leaking energy. So essentially we're using, the needles are of a particular thickness and width. So the finest needle is a 0.13. We use 0.18, and then the thickness is about a 0.3, like a 0.30 in terms of, length. And then thickness is 0.18. And so it's your intention. Where intention goes, energy flows. So when I'm needling, I'm thinking about exactly what I'm wanting to achieve as the needle enters and what that outcome is. And so by placing your hand onto the skin, that creates a touch point. So that can take away any hypersensitivity. And then inserting the needle, then with intention, it should just glide through the skin. It's something that you kind of, I guess, master over the more you practice, the more comfortable you become in your own skill and skin, like anything, right, in life. And so there are certain points that can bleed as well. So if you are taking things such as Clexane or warfarin, which is something that you need to advise your patient on, you can bleed from particular points. And sometimes too on the abdomen that can happen, but that can mean that you've just hit a capillary, and then the capillary bursts, and then that releases blood, which goes between the different fascia and muscle layers. And also too, if there's quite a bit of stagnation in a point, right, it's like a pressure cooker, energy builds up. You put that needle in, it's dispersing. It has a dispersing action. And so that releases the energy. And sometimes too, that can result in a gentle, like a small little release of blood. And most of the time, I mean, that's a positive thing, right? Because it's like anything, when pressure builds, it's got to come out somewhere. And we know that if we're, say, highly stressed, for example, we might be in the car or cursing. Do you know what I mean? So it's like that build up. And then it's also we use needles to tonify. So tonifying is essentially like imagining that your body's like a bank account and you're completely depleted, and you're replenishing your body with energy, the chi. So it's like building the body back up. So you have its resources, you're resourceful again, right?
That's very interesting. And I appreciate you sharing about sometimes there may be a little bit of bleeding, but it's not like going for a blood test and got blood coming out of you, like pouring out of you. It's not like that. So if anyone's thinking that, it's definitely not like that.
No, that's
Yeah.
I might add on that note, if that's okay, just quickly, is that particularly for patients that are pregnant that are having acupuncture, once you've had a positive pregnancy, is that your blood glucose levels can drop quite dramatically. So it's really important. I always tell patients when they're pregnant coming in to have something to eat before they come in, because acupuncture puts the body into that parasympathetic. And as it does that, your blood glucose levels drop. And if you haven't eaten,
and also,
you can start to feel quite faint.
Yeah. And also just lying down for a long time and feeling really relaxed, and then you get back up again. You're like, whoa.
Yes. You're like feeling quite woozy. You can feel quite out of it because essentially it drops you into that space where I call it the truth serum. So if you're completely exhausted, it will show you. So you'll come up from your session and you'll feel like, wow, I feel so tired. That's because you actually are, and you've given your body permission to rest. I went home and slept for 3 hours after my first acupuncture session.
I love that. I mean, even I just think about, even if you go and get a really relaxing massage, it's just that time and space to chill as well. That helps you get sleepy as well, which is never a bad thing.
No, and it's like you think about, right, if you're exhausted and you go and eat root vegetables, right, root vegetables will ground you because it's tapping into your base chakra, which is like you want to be grounded, right? You're like touching the earth by eating these root vegetables. It's like, yes, just ground me.
That's why everyone loves a pumpkin soup this time of the year.
Oh, isn't it just the best? It's like coming home.
It is. Oh, Amanda, you've been an absolute delight. Thank you for sharing all your wisdom and knowledge with us on today's episode of Fertility Friendly Food. I know I'm going to be linking to this one all the time when people ask me about acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine for fertility. But before we go, can you share where people can connect with you?
Absolutely. Thanks. You can find us on Instagram at Angea_acupuncture_yoga. And then, of course, on our website, which Steph will put in all the details.
I shall. You'll find all the links to Amanda and Angea in the show notes for you. And yeah, I love your Instagram. You post so many great, beautiful infographics. So if you like infographics, definitely give Angea a follow.
And I might just on that note add in, if that's okay, our little startup that we've just recently started, All Natural Pharmacy, which is a gynecological tincture range that supports gynecological healthcare from endometriosis, adenomyosis, and it's all well-researched Chinese medicine formulas that I've put together specifically for those types of conditions. Yes, so
that's amazing. Congratulations.
Thanks. It's been 7 years in the process of making. Yes, little gestation.
Just a little overdue.
Well cooked.
It is well baked. I love to hear it. Well, yeah, do send us the links to that as well, because a lot of people that tune in have endometriosis, adenomyosis as well. So we'll be sure to share that as well.
I'll send you up a couple of tinctures, actually. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, and we will catch you soon.